Welcome back, and thanks to CACI for that refreshment break. And now we're going to move on to a topic that I think is near and dear to everybody's heart, and talking about cyber R&D. So I'm pleased to welcome to our stage here our moderator and panelists. Our moderator, who will introduce the panelists, is Joan Fant, who is INSA's chair of our Technology and Innovation Council, and he's also vice president of Space, Intelligence, and Cyber at Peraton. So John, over to you to introduce our panelists and our panel on cyber R&D, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and national security.
All right, very good. Well, thank you, Chuck, for that introduction, and thank you all, the audience, for being here. It's good to see a lot of good friends and industry colleagues here as well, too, interested in this important topic. So thanks for being here to sit through our panel regarding cyber research and development focused on artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and we'll address some other topics as well, too. Particularly, this particular panel is directly related to a lot of the missions that we're focused on here in the government, the private sector, and across the academic community. So it's good to have representation from across that space here on the stage. So joining me here on the panel today, we have a series of very accomplished leaders from government, private sector, and academia. So I'd like to first start with Dr. Stacey Dixon. Stacey Dixon is the director of IARPA, where she manages and leads the innovation and multidisciplinary research efforts to achieve breakthrough technologies in the national security mission space. She previously served in key science and technology positions within the intelligence community. Thank you, Stacey. Also joining us is Dr. Joan Hoffmann. She's a physicist at Johns Hopkins Advanced Physics Laboratory, where she serves as a program manager for alternative computing paradigms in the research and exploration development mission area. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah,
all of that?
mouthful.
Good. In this role, Joan's responsible for a portfolio of different responsibilities encompassing quantum computing, trustworthy computing, and computational physics. Dr. Hoffmann is also a member of the Defense Science Board. Additionally, we're pleased to welcome Ms. Peggy Styer. Peggy joins us as the managing partner of Razor's Edge Ventures, a multi-stage venture capital investment firm with expertise across the national security sector. In this capacity, Peggy is focused on managing the firm's investments across big data, cybersecurity, high-performance computing, space, and other technical-focused government solutions. Peggy previously has held CEO, CFO, and COO level positions across multiple companies, most recently Blackbird Technologies, which was sold to Raytheon in 2014. Is that right?
Yep.
So what I thought I'd do before we go ahead and get started with kind of the questions and going through a lot of the thoughts and ideas of the panel members, I wanted to get a sense of the demographic within the audience here. How many here are from government? Raise your hand, please. A few in there. In private sector, certainly is the largest group. Thank you. And how about from the academic community? Okay, we got a few back there. And then one involving quantum computing as well, too, in the back, I recall. So look, I wanted to go ahead and get started by saying that the purpose of today's panel, what we really want to do is make sure we're advancing the discussion around cyber research and development, so that all of us really come away with a strong understanding of where the government, academic, and private sector is focused in this area, what the role of each entity is playing, and go from there. We'll kind of tweak the discussion along the way as we go forward. The format of our panel today will basically be addressing some high-level points within cyber research and development and start narrowing that down into some more specific areas along the way, keeping in mind that the greatest value that we're going to get is from the back and forth bidirectional exchange going forward. So as we have, so I'll go through a series of questions here. We'll certainly open that up to the audience towards the end, but also we may stop along the way and address some points as well too. But first, let me go ahead and begin by starting with you, Stacey, and then kind of going along the line here to get a sense of give the audience a sense of what your role is within cyber research and development, both you and your organization, and where you play in cyber research and development. And as you think about that, kind of give a sense of what the cyber research and development landscape looks like as well, too, from your vantage point.
So IARPA is the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects activity. We are often described as a DARPA-like entity for the IC, for the intelligence community. We serve the purpose to do higher risk, higher payoff, longer focused research that the intelligence agencies can't take on themselves. That's why we were created about 12 years ago. We don't have an operational mission. We fund research. We don't actually do any research in-house, so that's probably the number one thing people need to know about us. We create research programs that have very challenging metrics. We invite people to propose against what we're trying to accomplish, these program goals, and then we fund. We fund teams generally, so academia, industry, partnerships, sometimes all industry, sometimes all academia, sometimes a combination of the two. It makes for a really interesting comparison of who's developing capabilities and which mission they're actually trying to deliver it for. So with respect to cybersecurity, which is one of 8 program areas that we actually focus in. We have a couple of cyber programs, one that's looking at cyber forecasting. So how do you enable a decision maker to know farther in advance when a cyber attack is going to happen, both to the extent of knowing who's going to do it and who's going to be the recipient of the attack, so to speak, who's going to be the victim. Aspirational goals, but we've been able to so far find some interesting things out by which you can find from publicly available information, non-traditional sensors, so things that you wouldn't think to necessarily look for as an indicator that a cyber attack might be happening. Within that same realm, we focus on microelectronic security. We also look at cloud security. So our cybersecurity portfolio has a handful of programs, which are all cataloged on our website, so take a look at those. Nothing new right now open for business, but always looking for great ideas and always looking for program managers to bring ideas to us.
Good.
So I'll stop there.
Yep, very good. And Joan, your role within the cyber research and development community is pretty significant. Can you please elaborate a little bit on that? Not just from what you're doing specifically, but also Johns Hopkins APL as well too.
Yeah, so what I can really speak to specifically is very much the research part of the research and development. I sit within our research and exploratory development department and am really deeply involved in the question of quantum computing right now, which is something that's in a very early stage of development and something about which there's an enormous amount of excitement right now with an equally enormous unknown on what is going to be happening down the road. The implications are enormous, and in the coming few years, we're going to learn so much about both the feasibility of quantum computing, what's going to be happening, but also the application set, and that's one of the really exciting things. Famously, a quantum computer could run Shor's algorithm, something that could factor very large numbers exponentially faster than a classical computer, which speaks directly to cybersecurity. But the coming years, there's going to be a lot of effort on identifying other key applications, and from that will flow other impact in this arena.
Great, thank you. Now, one of the important segments of cyber research and development is, really understanding that not all research and development is going to be generated through funding directly from the government. A lot of that comes from the private sector, and the way that the private sector gets a lot of those new and emerging technologies is through investment, either from venture capital, private equity, seed funding, angel investors, et cetera. So Peggy, can you give us a sense of where what you're doing within your organization and how you're playing a role in supporting cyber research and development in the organizations and companies?
Sure. I think our team is a little different because we basically all were operators in a company called Blackbird Technologies, which was focused on cyber largely for the intelligence community and special forces. So we come from a strong mission set, very technical team. We do a lot of our own development and mentoring. And so our focus as a venture fund, where you take money from outside investors, you want to return a lot more money than you took, is on nearer term technologies probably than the rest of the panel. And so what we like to do is find and mentor and grow companies that are impactful in this space, very mission focused. What's unique, I think, to our firm is that we like to focus on government investments as well as enterprise investments. I think traditionally venture firms started by government investments, but lately is more focused on big industries. Cyber, I think, crosses over everybody is in this together, and so I think there's similar adversaries, similar threat surfaces in industry and in the government, and so that's our sweet spot. Not only in cyber, we like to do a lot of investments in space and other technologies, but nowadays cyber is in everything that you do, so I think we see that as a horizontal across our platform.
No, very good. So as we kind of continue down another set of discussions, one thing that I wanted to get an idea is that whenever you're looking at research and development is done in the intelligence community typically for a reason, because we wanted to align to a national intelligence priority. Are there a set of intelligence priorities that you can elaborate on to give the audience a sense of basically the reason why we're doing the things that we're doing in artificial intelligence, in cyber, in quantum? We're doing this research and development to apply it toward this specific mission priority or mission set.
So there's a very wide diversity of missions in the intelligence community. If you look at the agencies, so there are 17 elements of the community, or 16 different organizations. Many of those are actually agencies. So it's with CIA, with HUMANT, with NSA, with SIGINT mission, with NGA, with the Geospatial Intelligence mission. So you've got a number of different things that they're going to try to need capabilities for. With respect to the artificial intelligence and bringing machine learning to apply to these, dealing with all the data that's coming through, whether it is government-owned data, government-controlled data, or data from industry that we're purchasing now. If you look at the space industry as sort of one area where there's this explosion of data, that we want to be able to take advantage of that. We're going to need tools because there already aren't enough analysts to put eyes on everything. So we want to make sure that we can not lose sight of things because we didn't have a chance to look at it. So you want to engage the machines to be able to assist with that. And so not only within each agency is there an effort that needs some support and research, there are also efforts at the ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence level, augmenting intelligence using machines, which is trying to look across the community at sort of the global needs that everyone has that are common and figure out how do we move that forward, while individually with the individual missions, agencies can do that as well. But it could be with GeoInt, with SIGINT again. So then you've got the sound recordings, all of the things that you can get both from the internet and other places, with just voice recordings, data, documents that you would want to triage to be able to know what's in them. So being able to take advantage of all the publicly available data is another place where we see machine learning really helping us out.
Okay, one thing that and I just got back from Colorado at the Space Symposium last week. So cyber crosses a multitude of different segments, different areas. You just mentioned space a second ago, which reminded me of it, and it makes me draw a parallel to Peggy, some of the companies that you may or may not be focusing on within your portfolio of companies as it relates to space-related companies. Are you currently invested in any space companies or looking at future space companies, and what segment or application of space are they addressing?
We're actually invested in 3 space companies.
Okay.
2 of which can be more stressful because you actually get a do-over when you're out in space. So one of which is called spaceflight, which is observation, so low Earth orbit. And they also have a space launch capability, which was stressful last year because they're the father of the clown car, which was 64 small sats launched at one time, which that was a drinking opportunity, luckily, in a good way. But their observation, and another one of our investments is called Hawkeye 360, and they're more signals-based. Okay. So, there's all kinds of opportunities to use signals for all kinds of purposes, as you alluded to. And then there's the fusion of all that data is a third opportunity. And we have a company called Black Lynx, which does high-performance computing, and so we're manipulating that sort of capability, faster and faster processing, because you need it at the edge. So that's a space-based opportunity for us as well.
And what's really exciting to see is all the places the industry is now investing that used to be sort of the area that the government had the lead in, that we were really doing most of it. There's so many more things that the government can now leverage that industry has a business case that has nothing to do with government, which is fantastic.
Yeah, we work really closely with the government. They'll come by, and say, well, tell me the latest about space or AI or ML, because we see all kinds of strange things out there. I mean, companies that you wouldn't believe. We used to tease about launching pet ashes in space, and then somebody came in and pitched us on it. And I was like, okay, there's not every idea needs to be fundable, but it's a good opportunity to triage that for the government needs to take advantage of good ideas. So.
Yeah, and I have to thank Joan in particular for being here today, because she's missing a couple of meetings I found out today from the Defense Science Board. I don't know if we're doing you a favor by getting you out of those or not. But but as it relates to Defense Science Board, I know you're focused on the quantum component of the work that they're doing there. Mm-hmm. Are there, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit, are there any other areas, as we're addressing the cyber area, are there any other priority areas related to cyber that the Defense Science Board specifically is focused on and investing in?
Yeah. So I'm a member of the Defense Science Board's study on the applications of quantum technology.
Okay.
But at any given time, they have a number of studies running addressing some of these topics of key importance, including the 10 topics that Mike Griffin, the Undersecretary of Defense, has identified as particularly high priority on the road to dominance, as they say. And so there are a number of studies going there. I can speak specifically only to the quantum applications.
Okay.
That's my involvement.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
So let me, and we're going to come back to that in one second. So Stacey, let me come back to you and ask, I want to talk to you about artificial intelligence and what IARPA is doing there. So when you look across the intelligence community, you see there's the AIM initiative at ODNI. NGA has their AAA initiative. Of course, there's MAVEN and the JAIC within the Department of Defense. What programs is IARPA focused on from an AI standpoint? What level of success have you seen there? And what kind of challenges also are there still left to go?
I'll describe it in two different ways. So historically, we found that applying machine learning to a number of different programs, which I wouldn't necessarily call AI programs, has provided amazing insight into the data that we're trying to assess. So whether that is our natural language processing, so translation, automatic speech recognition programs, or whether it is some of these imagery programs, we've had a lot of success applying this machine learning to it. More recently, we've decided that while there is research going on in adversarial machine learning and some of the security vulnerabilities, we would like to see more. Mm-hmm. We all sort of appreciate the fact that AI is going to be in a lot more things in our life, and we're going to be relying on it a lot more. So we would want to be able to take advantage of, or at least to mitigate those vulnerabilities that we know exist. So we've started two programs, or we're in the process of starting two programs that are looking at the AI assurance realm. Both of them sort of looking at training data. So one looking at if you don't have control of the training data, and perhaps someone has implanted some sort of a trigger in there. So they have inserted some training data that is saying that a stop sign is actually a speed limit sign, for example. How do you know that there are these kinds of triggers in your training data as you take the algorithms that come out of the training and then use them for something else? So that's number one. Okay. The second one is being able to protect the identities, for example, if you have a training data set full of faces.
Sure. And
some of these may be sensitive faces. You don't want people to know that you've been training on these faces. How do you ensure that no one can take the algorithm that you created and go back and recreate the faces that were in the database? So these are certain areas that we hadn't seen much research in, and so we will be starting programs in these. They're shorter programs because the speed of AI is so fast that we can't really predict where we're going to need in 2 years, or let alone 5 years. So we have some short 2-year programs that we're starting, which will have broad agency announcements. There's a draft one out now. A final one should be going out soon for the Trojan program. Trojan AI is the name of it, and the other one will be coming out a little bit later in the year. So we're excited to see what kind of capabilities come out of that. But we do work with the other organizations that you mentioned to see what they're investing in. And we typically try to spend our time and effort on things that others are not. So we look for the gaps, and we focus on those types of things that either other government agencies or industry are working on.
Yeah. So as I look around the room, I know a lot of my colleagues in industry. They're pretty well attuned to some of the technical advancements in cyber and AI. I think that it's probably less on the quantum computing side of things, maybe because it's a little bit newer, maybe it's a little more technical. So could you give us, Joan, I don't want to say a layman's term view of it, but you can get as technical as you want to, with specifically what quantum computing is and how the advancements in quantum computing from a research standpoint can transition into being applied in a national security sense.
Yeah. So the idea of building a quantum computer is usually attributed to Richard Feynman back in the 1980s, and the idea of harnessing quantum mechanics, so the behavior of matter at the very smallest length scales, to use in a computational paradigm. And it was kind of this curiosity to physicists for a long time until I believe it was 93 or 94 when Peter Shor published an algorithm saying, hey, if you had this quantum computer, there's a way that you could factor very large numbers exponentially faster than on a classical computer. And suddenly, of course, that becomes very exciting because that's what our cryptography is based on, what our most commonly used cryptography is based on. A lot of excitement, but it took years until we were able to start realizing the building blocks of quantum computers. You know, for classical computing, you start with the bit, 0 or 1. For quantum computing, you start with a qubit, 0, 1, or a superposition of 0 and 1. And these qubits can be what's called entangled with each other, so that the state of one is entangled with the state of another. This explosion of complexity and this explosion of power. And it took years, but we've gotten very recently gotten to the point where we now have enough qubits, small numbers of qubits, a few tens of qubits, where we can actually start really playing with these small machines, figuring out how they're really working, how some of these ideas about information processing are actually going to play out. Now, you know, the dirty secret, not so secret, is that these qubits are very noisy, they're very unstable. And so the reason there's been so much progress, but it hasn't gotten us to a quantum computer per se, is because these qubits are still very short-lived, they're very noisy, and it's thought that quantum error correction will be necessary in order to realize a really large-scale, fault-tolerant quantum computer, something that can actually perform these complex algorithms. What we have right now are what's called these noisy intermediate-scale quantum devices. NISQ devices is a term coined by John Preskill, a professor out in California. But the brilliant thing about these devices that are coming online now is that they're letting us do actual tests of the building blocks of algorithms, the building blocks of error correction. It's giving us a pathfinder now to where we're going to be in the coming years. And I think the insight that will be gained in the next several years is going to be invaluable.
Yeah, thank you for that. I worked with a really smart computer scientist at one of my last organizations who was studied quantum computing in for his dissertation. And I sat down with him for a long time, and he started explaining things to me, and I kind of got lost. It's just starting at qubits, it was, and it does get very complex. What I want to really understand is, can this help us with respect to securing our national infrastructure, basically assisting in the cybersecurity problem? And how can you apply it in that sense?
Yeah, and that's a great question. A common misconception about a quantum computer is that it would be a replacement for a high-performance computer. A quantum computer is not a replacement for a classical computer. It's a special purpose device that can do certain specific quantum algorithms very well. The best known of these is Shor's algorithm for factoring. Also, there are algorithms that have been developed for certain kinds of optimization problems, combinatorial optimization problems. Those are ubiquitous across the IC, across the DoD, and so I think that's going to be a really interesting thing. That said, I think that we haven't identified that many quantum algorithms yet. We don't have ideas of what the applications will be because there haven't been the machines for people to test things, to try things out. There haven't been enough computer scientists thinking about quantum computing. And so I can answer your question to a certain degree where we have certain things identified like factoring or optimization, but I think that the field is wide open for identifying new applications, other applications that will be relevant to cybersecurity and across the IC.
Oh, excellent. So Peggy, if you hear about this, we talked about space and the type of companies that you're investing in the space area and the cyber area. I know some of them. Have you looked, because I know your organization is looking at investing in companies that support national security missions. Are you also investing in companies that have AI applications right now and quantum applications right now as well too?
So we love quantum. It's one of those things that's always been interesting, and you know it'll be here. But the problem with venture investing is it has to be here within a time frame to make an investment viable and to be practical. And so we looked long and hard at a really interesting quantum company who was, the problem was the machines weren't coming fast enough for their, and then in the interim they had day jobs doing, coming up with algorithms and doing things that were similar, but it would be too long a wait for our mandate. Now AI is, ML, AI, the fuzziness there, but we have invested in an AI company which basically looks for cancer and pathology slides. And so it's kind of a pattern matching, which is more of an ML, but where the AI comes in is it actually is, so generally it's thought that the best pathologists are sort of, I hate to say this, is 50% accurate. It's just a hard thing to look at massive amounts of, and so when they train these computers, they're more in the 90%. So the combination of a doctor and the machine together is really going to change, I think, the way we do health. Where the AI comes in for the machine is predictability. The computers seem to have a much higher rate of this, yes, this is cancer, and this is what it will metastasize into, generally, unless treated. So that's actually an application of AI that you can get your hands around and package enough to actually make an investment and in the time frame that we're allowed.
So is this something where on the quantum side or other areas of cyber that you have to wait for a certain level of maturity? Is it a maturity of the technology, or is it where you can see the return on investment? Maybe a little bit of both before you can decide that, hey, we're going to make an investment in this area because we see it being applied.
So our first fund launched in 2010, and our first investment was in a really cool high-performance computing company that had NSA roots. I mean, we used to call them the toy makers, up there. And we were way too early on that. And so just keeping a company and helping them evolve until the market matures. Even the nice thing about the way we invest is we like enterprise or government, because there's a sweet spot. And sometimes the government are the early adopters, and sometimes industry is early adopters. And so in this case, the CEO tried to make industry be an early adopter, and did a lot of work with Amazon and Dell and things like that for high performance computing. And in the end, we swung it back to the government, and now it's racing. Because edge processing is, really important, and the time that you can get things done with specialized computing is just enormous. So you get in too early, it's not good for you or the company or the investors. But be creative.
I think this is a really important point I'll build off of in the quantum world. There are a number of quantum startups out there that have venture funding, which puts such importance on this identification of applications and new algorithms in the short to medium term. Otherwise, you can't get that virtuous cycle going where there's really a return and you can keep improving.
Yeah, so as we're talking about not just research and development, but investment in research and development, Stacey, what's your viewpoint as to who should be the people that really start investment to get new technology going for the national security spaces? Should it be the government that has money to invest in a certain area and drive that ball forward, or should that innovation or R&D come from the academic space, or perhaps the private sector investment space, in your view?
Realistically, it has to be everyone. I mean, it has to be really a partnership. If you look at our sort of near-peer competitors and others who would seek to take a new advantage, be the ones that have the advantage in terms of the technical space, it's sort of all hands on deck, whether it's academia, industry, and government all investing in certain areas. So that short answer would be, I'd like to see all three.
Absolutely.
I think there's a place for all of them to play, and there's definitely overlap in places where we have to work together. The government used to be the biggest funder of a lot of things, and now we're not. And so we having to figure out how to play in Peggy's world, where we know that there are going to be venture firms that are going to give more money and more quickly and probably larger amounts to a startup company than a government would be able to do in that same timeline. We have to figure out how to live in this space where the great industry investments can also support the national security endeavors. And I think you gave a great example, Peggy, of one where while they were looking at commercial industry as they thought it was going to go for, it ended up being government who ended up being the final recipient of it. And as long as the country is benefiting, whether it's government or industry, I think we'll be fine. But I wouldn't want to see any one group back out of that. All three of them have a role to play with respect to pushing innovation forward and finding funding and putting funding towards it.
Okay. You know, I'd like to drill down for a second on some of the risks in the quantum area. So in AI, for example, there's the adversarial part of it, there's poisoning data sets, basically everything you want to do to support AI assurance. There's risks involved there. What are some of the risks in the quantum space, if any, that you can think of?
Well, I think one risk is something I alluded to in my previous comment, in that typically in technology development, when you say look at the history of the development of classical computing, we talk about the Moore's law scaling that we enjoyed for so many decades. And a lot of that was a result of this virtuous cycle that performance was increasing, profits were increasing, and thus the amount of money that could be spent on research and development was increasing. Quantum computing is something that's still very much in its infancy. There's a lot of excitement right now, and for good reason, because there have been so many excellent developments in the last several years, but there's a long ways to go. And I think that there's a real risk if people's expectations get too far ahead of what we're able to do. If we fail to identify some shorter and medium-term applications, there's a real risk of a fall off there in the activity. Now, from the risk side of the capability of great units, quantum computing is the kind of thing that can provide an asymmetric advantage to someone who achieves that capability, most famously in cryptanalysis, but also in some of these optimization sorts of problems. So, yeah.
Yep. So look, all of us have, whether we're in private sector, investment, government, academia, we all have a certain budget, pot of money, and we have to allocate that towards certain priority areas. Starting with IARPA, Stacey, when you look at your budget, what drives your decision making as to how you allocate those funding towards a series of programs?
It sort of all starts with a great program manager and a great idea. Those are generally inspired by the missions of the intelligence elements of the agencies that we were mentioning before. If those things come together, we will typically be able to find the funds for it. We have any number of 30-something programs I think that we have ongoing at any given time, and they're always programs starting and stopping. Our programs are typically 3 to 5 years, although we're taking on some shorter ones now too. So I'm always looking for new ideas and new things to go forward with. I do have to balance it because typically some of the computing programs typically are the more expensive ones. Anything involving hardware, where you actually have to send things to foundries and build chips or build equipment like for quantum computing is going to be a more expensive program. So I can only handle so many of those a year with the budget that we have. But we're always looking for what gaps are in our portfolio, so what mission areas are we not investing in, and what good ideas are coming forward from program managers that are supported by the agencies that will be the recipients of the capabilities.
Yeah. Now, on the investor side, Peggy, supporting research and development on your end, as on the venture capital private equity world, when you do your due diligence on companies, and I'd like you in a minute to just kind of describe for the audience how you the process and how you do that. But before that, I want to get a sense of when you deploy your capital and you have to make those kind of decisions, you're going to be concerned, I would think, about corporate earnings, return on investment, multiple of EBITDA, those sort of things. What other things go and kind of factor in there as it comes to, or how do you balance that with also serving national security missions too? Because you could be a professional investor in a lot of different sectors, but I think because of your background, you chose to do that within the national security space.
Right. I think once you've worked in this mission area, it's really hard to go outside it. You can make money a lot of ways. I really think this is an important, everybody in this room, I'm sure, probably shares that approach. I think my secret to life is if you have a really strong team that understands a customer requirements, even if the customer doesn't necessarily express those, and then technologies of what's possible or could be possible soon, and listen to that intersection and act in that intersection, then that's where things work. Then you make the customer's life a lot easier. You're more effective for whoever, whether your customer is enterprise or government. And And the secret to that is where Stacey started. It's all about the team, right? We used to, when we started out as a venture firm, we were, came off running an operating company, and you sit down as mostly math backgrounds, and you say, okay, we're going to grade everybody, and these are the categories we're going to grade them in, and so we're going to give them, letter grades actually. To the academia is hiding in the back, and so we're going to say what's really important is your team. What technology or what focus you're on, since we're mostly technology focused, what market you're going after, how are you going to grade that, and then what are the deal terms that you're getting. Those 4 quadrants you're going to grade. And as we went on and evaluated more and more, we evaluate about 500 companies a year. It's all about the people. So you can really, create, change markets, pivot, change your technologies. But if you don't have a good team or you can't find a good team, then, it really. It's a lot harder.
Right.
So that's I think.
So Joan, is your with the research that you're doing, do you manage a certain budget as well too, where you have to allocate funds to support your research and development activities, or is it not focused in that way?
So Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab is what's called a university-affiliated research center. Mm-hmm. So we exist to provide trusted direction to the government, including mission-related research and development. And so we are funded by a number of government agencies. We previously worked on one of IARPA's programs for a long time on quantum computing. So we have we have a portfolio of programs involving quantum computing from a number of government agencies. Where we've really focused a lot is at some of these intersections with classical technology that APL has a real depth of expertise. So for example, we've done a lot of work with quantum control theory, so how to control, measure, and manipulate these qubits, and that has a lot in common with the classical control theory that the rest of APL has been working on so long with some of the legacy systems and whatnot.
Yeah, so the reason I ask a lot of the investment-related questions where IARPA, academic and private investment firms are investing is because oftentimes your investment is a forward look as to where you feel the market is going to go. Where you see that demand signal being created is where you're going to be positioning your funds and your money and your priorities. So when you look forward, we've talked about what the state of research is now and where you're focused now. When you look out, say, 5 years or so, how do you see that research and development environment changing in terms of what kind of things will be focused on? That's a hard question to ask. And then eventually, and a little bit later, we'll talk about how private sector can form collaboration with you to help in that effort. But right now, where do you see the future going and where do you think we're going to be investing?
I think it's interesting. The mission needs are pretty consistent.
Okay.
There are always surprises in terms of who your adversary might be or who the threat is coming from. Mm-hmm. And that changes over time. We haven't created the plan of exactly what I'll be investing in 5 years.
Okay.
And I think that's part of the beauty of it. You've got to be flexible because things change so quickly. Players come in and players come out. What we decide to do in the quantum space will depend on what Joan's doing and what our quantum program is doing. And as that one comes to an end, is there follow-on work that makes sense? So we're not going to see any less in AI. We're not going to see any less in quantum computing, and I can pretty much guess those, and I doubt I'll be wrong there. The exact applications of those things, I think, is where we're going to see a lot of that change. And to Joan's point, we don't know all the application space. We know what the hard problems are. And if the two come together, that'll be a great program. And we may find out, though, that some of these tools aren't really good for some of the problems that we want to solve. So again, looking at it, every year we'll look at it. I can't tell you right now what I'll be doing in 5 years, but I can look at the tools I have now and assume that I'll be applying those to something 5 years from now, and maybe there'll probably be some new tools that I will have that will be coming up through research that we'll want to be using to apply to whatever the mission areas are.
Yep. Okay. Any new? How do you see the future, Joan and Peggy as well?
Well, I think one of the really important things also is because the investment and because the research and development activity in these areas, in cyber and AI and in quantum, is such a mix of government, of private, of academia. Mm-hmm. That makes it so important for the government, for the DoD, for the IC, to really think carefully about what are their needs and where do they need to be in the future, because is not all of these entities have the same priorities. And if we cede in the decisions on investment purely to the private sector, that the priorities are not always the same. And sometimes there really is a much stronger push, say, coming from DoD on a particular technology than from the commercial sector. And so that's why some of these studies, so for example, the National Academies released a study specifically on quantum computing late last year that really spoke to some of this and of identifying application space and needs in order to make some of these decisions. It's one of the things we're addressing on the Defense Science Board study of, can we identify specific DoD needs that need to be driven, and where would the investment go there?
And Peggy,
I have two. Yeah, one's more in the government area and one's more in the commercial area, trends that we're seeing. In the government-focused area, we believe, cyber is kind of the wild, wild west, right? Everybody's getting attacked. Was it every 20 seconds there's a new attack? And so the government cannot just protect everyone. Right, you can't have a marshal in every town. I think that the authorities will evolve so that there is more power in industry to protect themselves, or a mandate to protect themselves. And so we've made an investment in a cybersecurity company called Black Horse, which is mostly government-based now, but poised to support industry when they are more. I know they want to. They're railing at the bit to go ahead and be more aggressive in that front. But this is a sort of a full force approach to support that as it evolves. I think it has to evolve in the next couple of years. And the other one is we call it CISO fatigue. There's so many cyber products out there. It's just it's like drones. There's 400 different platforms. So you need. We see a need from the CISO side to sort of combine those. They can't have little silos of solutions. They need to have that evolved into cohesive, solutions provided in the cyber product arena. But right behind that, they haven't gotten down the stack far enough, is most of the threat vectors come through the internet. And so we made an investment in a company called Authenticate, which is an air-gapped browser. I mean, if you actually think you're on the internet, but you're not actually on the internet, there's an air gap there, and you can do everything you need to do and maintain your state and all that stuff. Why would you ever, want to wade into the malware world? And so we made a big investment in that. And it's really funny when you look back again, who's the early adopter on that kind of thing? They went out. These are the guys that did the security behind the Google Mail, Gmail stuff. So this team, again, back to the people, have put together a solution like that, and they're out pounding the doors in enterprise CISO world. And there's a couple adopters that are really taking hold, but the government really is racing through that, and they're cutting off internet for large portions of the government that are not going through, this type of approach.
Yeah. Now, Peggy, you work with a lot of different companies. Do you ever come up against a lot of the companies that deliver great emerging technology? I mean, getting outside of AI and quantum for a second, into IoT, material sciences, embedded systems, all of these kind of things. And they can sit there and say, I can make more money in the commercial sector, and my path to money is a lot faster. It's not worth working with the government. Do you often run up against doing that, just in terms of looking at a small company with an emerging technology and just saying, it's just too hard. I want to support the government. It's just too hard for me to do it because of the hurdles there. Do you ever run up against that?
All the time. I think most of Silicon Valley has that main, like there's no margin in the government. It's too hard and it's intricate and it's, a foreign language. And so I think that's where we act a bit as a bridge to, it's not that hard if you know how to navigate. Government's a great customer. They have needs that they reach out and act on, right? So a lot of times it'll take longer to get something through one of the big banks. It'll take, a year and a half to go through, a larger and larger process there than it would necessarily for the government to execute on something that it really has decided it needs to do and adjust. So I think it's learn to maneuver. Just sort of knock on the door of, because there's a lot of people that are interested and want to learn more, but they don't really have the mandate or the authority or the budget to investigate further. And the consumer and the the little, especially the small companies, just think, he's interested, he wants to talk to me again. It's like, okay, you can do that all day long, but you're not going to get anywhere unless you really understand how it works.
So Stacey, from your vantage point, leading IARPA, an organization that thrives off innovation, partnership with the academic community and the private sector, what has IARPA done to, in terms of a different way of acquiring and bringing that innovation, not going outside the FAR, but being more creative within the bounds of the FAR to get that?
Exactly. I think when IARPA started using the broad agency announcements rather than a request for proposal that is a very specific thing that the government wants to buy, there's a lot more opportunity for creativity from what's being proposed. We also have been investing a lot in prize challenges recently, so throwing out a really fantastic research data set, allowing people from around the world to compete in a challenge that may last a couple months, it may last an entire year, where there's just interesting questions to be solved that you can see how what's solved will then impact someone's mission within the government. And then the winner gets a check. We have these things called seedlings, which are very 9 to 12 months shorter programs or projects that allow people to propose ideas to us. And so just trying to be very creative in the ways that we can entertain new ideas. But I would agree with Peggy's point. We're trying to make it so that people don't see us as someone that's difficult to work with. I think in many cases, the mission that we're going to apply their capability to is something that's motivating. And then once they can understand that, if we can communicate that in a way that A, makes sense to someone that's not in government, and then B, be able to share with them somehow the impact of the capability once applied, which isn't always easy, especially if they're not cleared, but figuring out creative ways that we can help people see how what they've developed is going to really make a difference in national security space. We're trying to be more creative in figuring out how to have that conversation.
Okay, and now Joan, on in partnering directly with IARPA, are there any initiatives that in the quantum area? I know APL has partnered with IARPA quite a bit in the past. Have you guys done that in the quantum sense yet?
Yeah.
And can you describe some of that and what that looks like?
Yeah, no, we our work with IARPA in the past has focused on what we call quantum computer science, really understanding the computer science of a quantum system, rather than focusing on a single qubit, the equivalent of a single bit. What does it actually look like to interact with that qubit, to measure it? How do they interact with each other? That kind of thing. What does it mean to understand the noise and the behavior of that? And that was been a very rewarding partnership in the past. Okay.
Now going back to the point for a second about working with different companies, smaller, the innovative, maybe the Silicon Valley companies. The other challenge we're facing, I don't know how prevalent it is, maybe you can elaborate on it. There's a cultural issue among a certain segment of the country, of the population, that does not want to work with the government, either because of a perceived ethical or moral concern, what have you. We noticed that a little bit with Maven when that was starting. How is it that we need to, as a community, incentivize companies to work with the government more frequently in support of national security missions? So
from my perspective, part of the conversation is with the American people. If you look at other countries who want to have the tech advantage, they are required in many cases to support their governments and do research for the good of the country. I don't want to have to require anyone. This, to me, is sort of a thing that I don't understand why people don't want to allow their talents to help protect their country, to help protect their families, to help protect their friends. Maybe it's a way of framing the question a little bit differently than, do you want to work for the government? Do you want to support the government? Do you want to keep this country safe? Do you want to make sure that we still have a tech advantage in the future? And that only way we're going to be able to do that is to have all the talent working together. I understand that there are trust issues, and at least within the intelligence community and other parts of government, we're trying to be more transparent. You got a ways to go to build the trust back and get that part. But just sort of from the base, I will not have what I'm developing support a government need. I just don't get it. And I would like for people to push back if you have conversations with other individuals. Get them in dialogue. I don't think the government's the one to have that conversation with them. They're already made their mind up with respect to interacting with I'll say me, but with respect to the government. Yeah. Maybe hearing it from their peers, hearing it from their colleagues, to just have them open just a little bit more of a question. Well, okay, but you understand that by not allowing your talent to help out in this way, that you could be impacting our ability to keep, your family safe, your child's school safe, your city safe. I hope we get to the point where we don't have to have that conversation in the future, where everyone is willing to see how they can contribute to making this country the best that it can be.
Got it.
I'd go back to something Peggy said also, that once you start working in this kind of mission-driven space, you really don't want to leave. And when people get a taste of that, of what that means, I know that we run a very large intern program, and we end up, many of those are students, bachelor's, master's, PhD students who never really considered working outside of academia, or maybe they were set on heading towards Silicon Valley. Once they come and spend a couple months doing some of this really mission-driven work that has such an impact on the nation's security, on their own security, frequently they come back, or they end up at another organization with a similar sort of mission. And so the more we can do to give people a taste of that as they're going through school, I think we'll start to solve some of our problems there also. There's just such a divide right now.
I think part of it is an education issue. I think many of us in this room are guilty of not telling all we know, and usually that's a good thing. But the discussion lately about, we've been talking for years about the impact of Huawei and the strategic, approach they've taken methodically to, become entrenched everywhere. And I think the general population has no clue what the impact on their daily lives will be of that. And I've noticed, which I'm sure a lot of people in this room, how a lot of the leadership in the intelligence community, not only here but abroad. I was in England the other day, and there was an article from Younger. It was just saying, Huawei is really doing things that people aren't aware of, and they shouldn't be doing. And so the impact on 5G, that whole discussion, I think, is being brought out into the open, and people are being educated that I think the stronger the U.S. is, the more stable the world is. And so I think people should do their part. You've got days that should count versus, days and years, but they'd be impactful, get engaged.
Yeah, fantastic. So I've got a million other more thoughts, ideas on this particular topic, but let me go ahead and take a moment now and just kind of open it up to the audience, see what kind of thoughts, ideas, questions that you guys have, and we'll kind of take it from there. In the back, yes, sir.
I'm Zach Biggs with the Center for Public Integrity. So I guess I'd direct this question at Ms. Dixon, given your comment in particular about having an open discussion with the American people about some of these mission sets. We saw a couple of years ago with the Cyber Grant Challenge from DARPA that when it comes to AI and cyber, that there could be broad application of AI when it comes to basically the hand-to-hand combat of cyber warfare even. I wanted to ask, what do you think the future is of AI's implementation for potential cyber warfare, for direct combat, as opposed to the sort of language learning or logistics, but the actual tip of the spear component? How do you see AI and ML potentially shaping that battlefield?
So you have me at a disadvantage because in the intelligence community, my charter is not to focus on warfare. Having said that, I believe that we're all trying to figure out exactly how we can use machine capabilities to help us be more efficient, more effective, faster response, bring in more power to bear on whatever the situation is. So we will continue to have conversations, and sort of the Department of Defense will continue to have conversations about what is that role. We, on our part, will be contributing in other ways, right? So making sure that the vulnerabilities are decreased, making sure that we can understand what the AI is doing, the decisions it's making the AI as transparent as possible, so that the country as a whole is more comfortable with capabilities, having more autonomy to make decisions. It's definitely going to be part of the conversation. I really don't have a prediction because we're not in that space in terms of how long it might be, or will we get to the point where it's going to be the fighting machines and there won't be people involved. So I can't exactly answer your question, but I appreciate your question and where it's going. I think that the public will need to be part of that conversation. Authorities, policies will need to be developed that can enable whatever it is that is allowed. So there's a lot number of steps that are going to be before we actually see it in implementation anywhere in the world.
Good. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So this is a general question. Dr. Watchorn. So when we start to think about the impact of the differences of quantum, you have quantum annealing computers, you have non-quantum annealing computers, you have high-performance computing that's now being overlaid, which will begin to enable cognitive computing. If 5G increases that capacity, then we will obviously adopt it in order to achieve that objective. But if we have to buy it from foreign sources, are we not violating our own supply chain risk management framework that we spent almost $500,000 per day for 365 days? And more to the point, isn't that the government just passed a strategic initiative on quantum computing one of the real reasons why we're seeing change in initiative in this particular discussion?
There's a lot there.
I don't know, Stacey, do you want to speak to the NQI at all?
We can. So the National Quantum Initiative. So there is an effort that the administration's leading out of the Office of Science and Technology Policy and the National, that is bringing together different government elements that all have a role to play in quantum computing to make sure that we are all working together, that we are figuring out, sort of the economic benefits of having a very strong, having the workforce that we need, having the policies we need, having the compute architecture that we need, and making sure that there are roadmaps that individual agencies are working towards so that we're not all working in cross purposes or in parallel, but that there is some synergy between us all. That's definitely, I think, getting more of us to the table at the same time. There were already conversations that were happening, but these meetings bring together everyone at the same time, so it's actually a pretty great opportunity to have that dialogue. It's extending out into academia and industry to make sure that that there are more funding opportunities. So you've seen great announcements from both DOE and NSF about centers that they're starting, consortia that are going to be out there, research opportunities that we believe will seed some of these things we're trying to achieve. There's the beginning part of the question that I've already forgotten.
And I'll add on, there are also some new initiatives recently announced at DARPA to look at these shorter-term applications for the near-term quantum machines that are coming online now, these NISQ machines. And so I think that there's really been a good focus across the board, if that's not too, but focus in a number of different key facets of the quantum question there to get at that.
Hey.
And just to round it out, it should be a partnership across industry and government, to make other options available.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and make one additional statement. And it's cyber research and development is extremely important. It's critical for our nation's defense, our security, and our economy that the United States maintains a national strategic advantage and intelligence advantage over adversary nations. The only way that's going to be achieved is through stronger public, private, and academic alliances. How are we doing in this as a country, in your view, and what do we need to do better?
I think that the level of investment, whether you're looking at the quantum initiatives or whether you're looking at the efforts that are focused on an AI strategy for the country, are sort of moving us in the right direction. Okay. It's a place where we're having the conversations with all of the entities at the table within government who have funding already or envision having funding to apply to these types of things. But recognizing that that's just the government piece of it, that there is the industry piece and then the academic piece, and it's all going to be all of us working together, whether it's funding going to the other sources, ideas coming from the other places. Not everything is going to be mandated by the government, but not everything is going to be funded by the government, and there's a realization of that, and there's a place for everyone to play in together. Okay. But the fact that we're actually at the table with strategies is a huge step. Yeah. To move us all forward in the same direction. And we should continue to make sure that those are updated and that we are seeing the results of the goals of those strategies over the years delivered as well.
Okay. Hey, Tommy.
Tommy Gardner with HP Incorporated. I appreciate the talk on the quantum, Dr. Hoffmann. That's very insightful. And certainly I personally feel the quantum ion trap and quantum annealing is the wrong way to go because of the energy requirements and the error correction you mentioned. There's other qubit possibilities that we should be looking at. I'm interested if you're looking at other quantum technologies in things of quantum key distribution, quantum sensors, quantum resistant encryption, other things at Johns Hopkins or at IARPA, Dr. Dixon.
So the mandate of the DSB study that I'm involved with is quite broad. It's across all quantum technologies, looking at the applicability and impact of quantum sensing and metrology and communications or networking and computing, looking at the technology readiness, where are the gaps, and really trying to dig into what are the unique missions within DoD. So that's been really exciting to do a deep dive in that. We kicked off that study in October. These things usually run about 12 months, so you look for the report out on that somewhere in the fall. Because really, as you hit on an important aspect of quantum technology, is quantum computing captures people's imagination, but there are all kinds of other technologies and applications for the same physical concepts. And some of these are really ready to move from the research to the development phase. And even looking at, say, like all of DARPA's investment in developing the chip-scale atomic clock and other applications for timing, for navigation and inertial nav, that kind of thing. And so I think we are perhaps at the start of an era of really pushing out on some of those technologies. A brilliant thing about that is that the progress we make on quantum sensing, it uses a lot of the same technologies, a lot of the same science that will then be applicable also for quantum computing. So they build off of each other.
Thank you.
Our investments right now are focused mainly on the quantum and optimization and then on the hardware, actual logical qubits. But the nice thing about what is sort of recognized in the larger strategy is that the likelihood of something else being the winning application before we get to a quantum computer is very high. So how do we make sure that for quantum information science, we have the investments, we have the students, we've got the researchers, and we also have the really interesting mission cases to which we apply that. And so that's been a big part of the conversation.
Okay. Yeah.
John Duker with IBM. I just wanted to let you know that IBM has a publicly available quantum computer. And just go to the IBM website and you can find, click around, search for quantum, and you can find yourself there. And programming for quantum is very, very different. It is not like programming a standard computer. And it will help your workforces get used to this new environment, which really will become relevant in 5 to 10 years. Then another thought relative to the Chinese. IBM has about 1,600 patents, which is more than the rest of the US community combined. The Chinese have 16,000 patents in quantum computing. So we really, really need to step up the bar.
Okay.
I think we agree.
Yeah. So let me make yes, sir.
How much do you run into companies like Peraton or charlatans that come in,
throw a curve at you, fake you out, try to steal money from you? How much of this is real versus?
Is that to anybody in particular? We were first starting. It's really rare, to answer your question simply, but when they're doing it, it's a doozy. We had somebody who had convinced somebody from a senior government employee to quit their job and to lead a company. And the CTO was basically faking all the data. They were, trying to, I think it was pick up Wi-Fi points from a single direction, you know, and he would tell you anywhere within 50 miles where a Wi-Fi spot was and all that stuff. And so we brought him in, and it just you know, it wasn't possible. So you get in there and sort of maneuvered him into doing a demo, live demo, as opposed to canned stuff, and just he couldn't pick up the one out in the parking lot. He couldn't pick up the one right above us. He couldn't, you know, obviously he'd canned all the data, but just watching the poor government guy's face just, you know, lose all the blood. It was like, you know, that guy was a fraud. But we've only run into one other case where people are actually just charlatans.
We do receive
Because the research is so theoretical and so much further advanced than other pursuits.
Not necessarily. They're just individuals who are convinced that they have an idea that, and that was a case of fraud, but there are other situations where there are people that just are convinced that they have a solution. So with their understanding of the problem, this is going to solve whatever mission issue is. And in asking more questions, we typically can come pretty quickly to figure out, okay, is this something really there, or is it not? And in many cases, it's not. For those cases that seem close, we do have a very rigorous test and evaluation regimen that we like to apply things towards, and so that's you know, if you tell me that you're going to be able to do something, you claim that you can predict the future, you can whatever. I have, generally speaking, either a prize challenge or a data set out there that you can show me what you can do, and that's one way to kind of get around the question of what you're asking. So it's, well, it didn't actually do what I needed it to do with my data set, so it's not the capability I need, as opposed to them being just frauds or just completely incorrect. Yep. That's sort of how we would handle it.
So as we approach the last few minutes here, one thing I wanted to kind of end on, starting with the ways that, so there's a lot of cyber research and development being done at all the companies being done here, with tons of money in IRAD and joint ventures taking place. At IARPA, it's more well known how to engage with you guys through BAA, Sealing, et cetera. It's pretty well publicized. In the academic sense and the venture sense, in terms of joint ventures and partnering with your portfolio companies, it might be less known to folks. So starting with Peggy, if folks wanted to partner with a series of your companies, or if they have some unique technologies that could be applied, what would be the best way, whether it be engaging with you or the venture community, what is the best way typically for folks to do that?
It's usually best to have an introduction, because there is a deluge. I mean, we look at 500, but we see thousands and thousands of approaches. And so if you can find anybody who has any sort of touch just to speak for you, instead of just throwing something over the transom or like that, you know, like that. We do have a website. You can go in, see if you know anybody on there, or any of the companies. That's the easiest way.
It seems like it helps legitimize the technology as well, coming forward, going back to the earlier point.
And it helps, it helps you sort of think through who you want to work with. Venture firms are very different, and so you know, we're like pre-revenue and early technologies. Other venture firms like a different, you know, sort of stage of growth, and so get to know who you're looking for to partner with, you know, for mission sets and funding, and you know, not everybody's the same. So do some research.
Yep, great. And Joan, in the academic world, is there do you often partner with a lot of private sector companies and joint ventures to drive R&D forward?
Yeah, so we sit right at that intersection, really, of government and private and academic. We're a division of Johns Hopkins University, but we're a university-affiliated research center. Yeah. So we partner broadly in order to bring the right team to bear on these missions for the government.
Excellent. Well, look, I hope the panel today and the information discussed today provided everybody with a lot of the overview of cyber research and development as it applies to the national security space, both from the government, academic, and private sector. So in that sense, I wanted to thank the audience, thank all of you for being here. Thank you to INZA and all of the sponsors, and most importantly, thank you to our panel members for being here and sharing your thoughts today. Thank you.
So thanks, John, and thanks to the panelists. Again, a question that I didn't ask, but that we'll consider for future discussions would be, we heard Grant Snyder this morning talk about a national cyber strategy. Do we have a national cyber R&D strategy, or should we? And I think we all agree anymore that the bulk of R&D in the cyber realm is happening in the private sector, and the government has lost visibility on it. Is there a way that we can do something to guide that R&D approach? And that'll be a subject that we take up in another forum at some point. So again, thank our panelists. We're going to break for lunch now. There are box lunches out here. Our lunch keynote speaker is here and ready to go. We're going to reconvene in here at 12:30. So get your box lunch, bring it back in here, and you are welcome to eat while we're having our cyber discussion after lunch. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.